What were some of the big winners in the session?
Hey, Karen. Well, you know what? It was Cisco Systems. It started off the rally this morning with those shares surging more than 16%. Of course, investors applauding the networking giant's belt-tightening measures, which, of course, resulted in better than expected outlook for the current quarter. Investors are still fretting over this U.S. debt deal that you talked about, whether it's going to get done before the deadline, whether we're going to see a U.S. debt default, and that really is weighing on investor sentiment. Having said that, of course, we are in the thick of earnings season, obviously in Europe and here as well. But as economies across Asia start to slow, concerns over credit risk are already making banks more selective about their lending. Many are focused on gathering deposits and hoarding liquidity.
Let's get to Saijal Patel, who joins us now from our CBC Global headquarters. And Saijal, nice to see you on tour. And tell us about this day, because it actually made history, didn't it?
Yeah, it did, Karen. I mean, look, I think people were really happy that there was probably more buying than selling going on. But like you said, history, it was indeed in the making, because the Dow has never had 4 straight days of 400-point changes, either up or down on the close. And today was that 4th day. All 30 stocks on the Dow were up, and the Dow actually closed 100 points off its high for the session. Plus, you had the S&P and the NASDAQ up more than 4.5%. So obviously setting some records of their own, Karen.
Some confidence out there, some buying on the street. Was there any real catalyst to send stocks higher?
Yeah, that's the thing, Karen. There wasn't any really big news. The catalyst really was the weekly report on initial claims for unemployment benefits, because the number of people filing those claims unexpectedly fell below 400,000. That's the first time that's happened since April. So, you know, despite all this doom and gloom in the markets and about the U.S. economy, we're hearing traders jumped on that claims report, deciding that perhaps, you know, fewer layoffs means that the economy may be in better shape than even the Federal Reserve realizes. Well, stocks finished sharply lower in the U.S. as European worries continue to weigh, and a jump in the U.S. dollar to a 3-month high against the yen after Tokyo intervened to curb its currency appreciation, also contributing to the downward pressure. We'll get more on that story later, but let's take a look at the closing picture on Wall Street. You can see some damage there for the Dow, shedding some 280 points or so, down 2.25%. S&P off by 2.5%, and the NASDAQ also losing around 53 points or so. Taking a look at the volatility index, or the fear gauge on Wall Street, you can see it creeping back at that just below that 30 level or so.
Saijal first with Sony's earnings. Saijal, what can you tell us?
Yeah, Christine, this is why these results, last quarter results, were so important, because so many of these companies were obviously dealing with the aftermath of the earthquake, supply disruptions. But everyone wants to know who's recovered, who hasn't, who's dealing with the yen strength, and who's struggling. Sony, their problems really go beyond the earthquake, and I'm going to get into that in a second. In terms of the numbers, though, they did come in better than expected. A 59% drop in operating profit. Most were expecting a 77% drop. However, obviously, website hacking scandal, that was a big one that cost them a little bit. They said that the cost was in line with previous forecasts, so it looks like that was around $180 million. And the other problem, it looks like the TV business, they're still struggling there, because they've cut the annual sales forecast for this year, obviously 19%, expecting to sell around 22 million units. They've left the...
Well, global business leaders and policymakers are in Singapore for the annual Singapore International Energy Week. CNBC's Saijal Patel is live at the event, and she has all the latest updates. Sage.
Yeah, that's right, Lisa. Well, I have with me Nobuo Tanaka, who is the former executive director of the IEA, certainly following all the trends that are happening in the energy industry. So let's start off. Tanaka-san, thank you for being with us. First of all, I want to start off with the nuclear situation. And certainly the view and popularity of nuclear has changed given the nuclear crisis. Germany has turned its back on it. There's calls to abandon sector. But you feel that it's still, nuclear plays a very viable role in the energy mix. Tell us about that.
Yes, definitely. It is a case. Even with this serious accident in Fukushima, Japanese government tried their best to recover, cold shutdown, and I would say cleaning up the contamination. Important thing is this option for the energy security and sustainability, we have to maintain it. And I learned that the countries in the IEA ministerial meeting, including China, India, or other countries, say that Japan should keep this option and to make it safer.
Tanaka-san, the challenge, of course, is if Japan abandons nuclear, where are they going to get the alternative energy source from?
Yes.
And what does it mean for cost as well?
This is a very, very serious question, which Japanese government is underway for reviewing the old energy policies. If we have to phase out nuclear, yes, we have to rely on the renewable energy sources, but it's very expensive. We have to import more oil, we have to import more gas, and the price of these fuels could be higher. So impact is not limited in Japan, but it's global. So we have to design carefully what is the future of the energy policy for our country.
Thank you very much
You're
for
most
your
welcome.
insight today, Tanaka-san. That was Nobuo Tanaka, of course, the former executive director at the IEA. Lisa, I'll send it back to you.
Welcome back to Squawk Box Asia. The latest trade numbers out of Canada show exports grew in September from a record slump. That was helped by a surge in shipments to the EU. The U.S. and EU are Canada's biggest markets, but some have said the administration of Prime Minister Stephen Harper has been slow to tap Asia's trade potential. The Premier refuted that criticism in an interview with CNBC's Saijal Patel.
First of all, I think Canada has tremendously growing trade with Asian countries. We've had an over 30% increase in our trade with China just since our government came to office. I think there's more we could be doing. Heading to India tomorrow, I think there's a lot of untapped potential between Canada and India. I'm not the least bit worried about Canada being a laggard on any of these things.
The Canadian dollar has strengthened with the economic recovery, but it is hurting Canadian manufacturers. So how do you ensure that Canadian businesses and exporters stay competitive?
Well, first of all, there's more to competitiveness than just the dollar. As you know, we've made a real effort as a country, for instance, to get our tax rates down. The corporate tax rate in Canada will be the lowest in the G7 in the next couple of years. Look, the governor of the Bank of Canada, the Prime Minister, as you know, generally doesn't speak about the dollar. The governor of the Bank of Canada has said there are risks if our dollar goes up too quickly, and I think he's been pretty clear on that. But I think overall, if you look at the range of the country's strengths, its infrastructure, its people, its tax rates, improvements we've made to the regulatory system, I think we remain a pretty good place to invest and do business. And as I say, the governor has been very clear that the dollar should not be rising above its genuine value.
As China continues to feed its hunger for resources, Canada is becoming more attractive. How does Canada continue balancing boosting trade ties with China and yet protect Canadian interests without sounding protectionist?
Our position is very clear. We're not a protectionist country or protectionist government. I mean, the lifeblood of the Canadian economy is trade. And for that matter, it's the lifeblood of the global economy. If you look at the globalization of the economy and the growth we've seen in the past decade, it is almost exclusively due to the increase in international trade. And I think when it actually comes to China, although China and ourselves have some different interests and some different perspectives, China and Canada are both pretty strong advocates of the necessity of not only resisting protectionism, but in further liberalizing markets. So that's a perspective we both share, and one that, you know, every meeting I've been at, President Hu and myself and others have spoken very forcefully for those things.